Welcome back to the table once again. We have more on the road to Gen Con coverage, and this time we're covering Race to the Raft. This is not I Love Cats, although it looks a little similar, and that is because this is kind of the follow-up to that.
It is. It's in the same world.
Same world, but completely different game. If you thought, oh, this is just going to be kind of another take on I Love Cats, no, it is absolutely not. Now, this was sort of, they ran a crowdfunding campaign some time ago on this. I do believe it is just now delivering, but for the first time available at a convention, Gen Con will be your ticket.
That's exciting.
So if you're at Gen Con and you want to check this out, be sure to track it down and see if you can get a copy. This is a limited communication, cooperative game that still has sort of like kind of the polyomino vibes and some of the puzzling that you might do, but it's a completely different game.
Yes.
So what are we doing here?
Here we are on the Isle of Cats, and it's under fire.
Yes.
So we are trying to actually race to the raft to get off the island safely. But it's not a competitive race, right? We're doing it cooperatively. So we have multiple cats around the island that we're trying to herd back onto the raft to safety. The thing is, each of the cats can only cross their own color.
Yeah.
So the blue cat can only go on these water spaces, the green cat can only go in the forest, and the yellow cat can only go on these desert-like places.
And they have to do all that with us having very limited communication. At the beginning of any given round, and by the way, speaking of rounds and how this game is structured, this is a scenario, and what we've got built here is the first tutorial scenario. It's a tutorial campaign that has 4 scenarios, and this is the first one, and it will slowly teach you effectively all of the different things building up to the sort of complete game with all the different elements. But then, I believe there's 81 different scenarios or something like that, and then I think even more online that they promise in the rule book. So
seasonal events, a lot to come.
A lot of game here to play, and it's pretty tricky. At the beginning of a round, everyone's going to draw up 3 cards again, but before you do that, you have to talk through it before anyone takes the first card, because once someone takes one of their first cards, stop talking. You can't talk. Once everyone does have their cards, you can talk again. However, there's lots of limitations and rules. We won't go through all of them, but suffice it to say is you can't say, I have one that has 3 blue like this and 2 purple. You can say, this one can help. I can help with blue quite a bit, or I could help with green, or like I'm not going to be any help on purple. But there's 2 different things you can do on your turn.
So once you decide, like, okay, I said that I could help with yellow, and the team said, okay, Emily, go ahead and do it. Then as soon as I start to play it, talking stops again.
Yeah.
I play it out onto the board. And I can play it wherever I want. It doesn't have to be connected to anything right now. But ideally, I'm trying to get along that yellow path for that yellow cat to be moving.
Oh, that's a good card.
It was a great card, just like I said. Once I do it, though, as soon as I place any card in the field, I then have to take a fire token out of the bag. And as I'm doing this again, my teammates cannot be talking, even if they see where I place it. And they're like, oh, that's not where I wanted to place it.
And I'm telling you, that is a tricky thing to do, because when someone's placing and you don't quite feel it's the right place, it is hard not to go,
The thing about fire, so we're just going to keep placing more fire and fire, and that board is going to keep restricting and restricting. And like David said, as you get to tighter spots, you might have had a card that you could have played right there, but now the fire is just overlapping that 3x3 grid where the card would go, and it's no longer possible. So you're really trying to make sure you're doing things in coordination with everybody.
Yeah, and it's not just about laying those cards and building the paths. You have to move the cats along those paths. And in the first tutorial, when you move a cat, you can move it as far as you want along that path. But later, spoiler alert in the game, or after the tutorial, in fact, you're only going to be able to move the cat 5 when you move it. And to do that, instead of playing a card on the board, you actually just discard that card into the what they call the disaster pile.
Yes.
And then you can move any cat you want, you know, as far as you want in the tutorial, but 5 spaces this way. We'll go 5, so I can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now this brings up another thing, like Emily was saying in terms of like navigating the fire, you also need to get used to moving those cats, because you don't necessarily want to move them as far as you can, because that can actually disrupt the way a card plays, because oftentimes you're going to want to overlap cards, and you may even want to overlap the last edge of a card that the cat is on, so that you can extend it more easily. The trick here too is once the game, when you get into further scenarios, there's a lot of cats. sometimes they make you navigate fire that's already on the board that's
Yes.
very difficult. So
And
you're gonna
overlapping paths from the cats.
yeah, you have to play cards that are effectively not just going to help yellow,
Yes, they have to
but
be
you're
able to
going to have
help
to
both.
help yellow and purple, or blue and green, and things like that. And it becomes very tricky on top of not being able to really talk with each other. However, that too can change.
Yeah, exactly. And like David said too, once you move someone, it gets harder to move them again in the same round. Instead, if you want to move them again, you'll have to discard 2 of your cards instead of just 1. So it's a lot of managing your resources on how many cards you have. It's a lot of managing that communication, making sure we're not stepping on each other's toes, but actually helping each other. All the while, fire just keeps encroaching and encroaching and encroaching.
Yeah, everyone has those 3 cards, and the round ends when the 3 cards are all played out by everyone. And then you effectively unexhaust the cats so that they can now once again move with 1 card, and everyone draws up again, and you rinse and repeat until either you get all the cats on the raft, or you get to a situation where you can't place a fire token, or you can't really do anything to sort of manipulate the board. We haven't played too far into it, but I can tell you, even the tutorial missions we played started to offer the kinds of challenges that you could recognize as, oh, I can see how they're going to make this more and more difficult. Because right now we have this raft. This is easy to jump on. But then you have rafts like this where each cat of a different color has to enter the raft from a very specific position. Later still, there are situations where you have these objective tokens where the green cat has to be the first cat to get on the raft. If you've ever played things like The Crew, some of the rules that they inject into those scenarios feel similar to this, even though they're completely different games. But it can get really tricky, and they introduce some tokens to kind of help you navigate those trickier puzzles. One of which is the water tokens. You get like 3 water tokens, and I think you can use those 3, although you'll kind of suffer
points damage.
But
they're like extra lives, right? So they're allowing you to take a specific fire off of the board when you're like, oh no, it's getting a little too dicey here. I can lose a few points, and at least we can keep going and hopefully still save the mission.
And then 2 more tokens. I'll talk about the first. And I'll talk so you can understand me, is the talk token. On someone else's turn, if you have a talk token, you can put your talk token, basically discarding it for the game, and then talk freely with the person who's going. So if they're about to place that fire and you're like, no, that would actually be much better right here. There's a perfect spot that won't bother anyone. You can do that. And then there's the cat token.
Meow.
And
meow, meow, meow.
This is all the cat can say. It's effectively just like the talk token that I just described, but that person
meow, meow, meow.
can only say meow. And if that sounds silly or dumb, it's not. It is.
But it's fun. It's thematic.
Super fun, because there's a moment where I'm placing something and Emily puts it down and goes meow, like very stern meow. And then I'm like, should I do it in meow? Like, it was very interesting to hear the meow change until I go, okay, now I'm doing it right. So it's a lot of fun and a lot of different puzzles that come into play with some of the things they interject. Like, I think this could really end up being a really puzzly game. I mean, it is really from the get-go. One other cool thing, you want to tell them about these card backs, which I thought was a nice touch.
So when we're deciding which cards to take to, it is a decision because it's a discussion around what colors do we need, and the way they've laid out those card backings is that it shows the distribution of each of the colors in there.
Yeah.
So you can kind of see like, okay, the X's have mainly green and blue with a little bit of red, yellow, and purple. The O's have no purple on it. So if we're going for purple, don't take the O's because there's literally none on there.
And that doesn't necessarily mean that purple on this deck is on every card.
Right.
It's literally breaking it down by the individual squares on the 9-square grid on that card. So there could be 30% purple, but they're all on these cards. Some of those cards might not have purple.
Yes, exactly.
But it does kind of help guide you in how you're going to navigate that.
Yes.
And like we said, all the cats are going to move on their colors. I want to point out this one too. This one and some of the other decks have this little like pathway. There are the Oshak cats, which you might recognize from I Love Cats. Those can go on any color, but they have to follow those routes. So they keep introducing things, like any game with scenarios, that just make it more and more complicated. And thankfully, a few things to make
little mitigation there.
A little mitigation there. But yeah, this is Race to the Raft. This is from City of Games. If you liked I Love Cats theme, you will probably like this. It is not the same sort of game, but I think we were talking before we started recording. I think there's a lot of overlap in terms of the weight and the feel and the vibe, the general vibe this game gives off, even though the games themselves are
very different.
Very, very different. I think you might like this. But so track them down at Gen Con, give it a go. And of course, until next time, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you then.